I was in Xi'an recently, standing in a line that snaked around 3 city blocks just to get into a history museum. Next to me was a young software engineer in his late 20s. A few years ago, someone like him would have spent the entire wait checking real estate apps or talking about his next big investment. But when I brought up the economic crisis that Western headlines have been screaming about since the start of 2026, he didn't look panicked. He didn't even look concerned. He just gestured toward the museum doors and said, "The fever is over. We're finally trading the speed for the ballast." That one sentence felt like a window into a massive silent pivot that most analysts are completely missing. While the economist is busy performing a pathological autopsy on China's growth, treating a deliberate slowdown like a terminal illness, something far more surgical is happening. It's as if the entire system has decided to walk away from the financial parasitism of the last decade to secure what the leadership calls physical resilience. It's a bizarre sight to witness. On one hand, you have Western media waiting for a collapse. On the other, you have a Chinese public that is suddenly obsessed with its ancient roots and a bureaucracy that has stopped rewarding raw output in favor of technocratic execution. The old GDP superstars are being replaced by system optimizers who prioritize AI sovereignty over apartment blocks. This isn't just a market correction, it's a civilizational firmware upgrade. But why is this happening now? And how did a nation once addicted to breakneck speed suddenly find its greatest strength in becoming a civilizational ballast? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to really unpack that phrase trading speed for ballast. We're going to try and move past the usual economic headlines and look at these huge structural shifts happening, because it really feels like we're looking at 2 different operating systems running 2 of the world's major economies, and they're both giving fundamentally different answers to the question of what national strength even is.
And that strategic divergence, that's the whole story right there. You have one model that is very deliberately doubling down on physical resilience, on long-term planning, and just tangible industrial output. And then you have the other in many developed economies, which has gone all in on financial dominance and, well, short-term profit. The thing is, you can't really grasp China's pivot towards this ballast, this idea of stability and deep strength, without first understanding the fever that it's so intentionally trying to break.
Okay, let's start there then. Let's unpack this concept of financial parasitism. It's a pretty loaded term, but it feels incredibly descriptive of what's been happening in the West for decades now. It's not just about banks making money, it's a whole reordering of the economy, isn't it? How do you even define financialization in a way that makes sense of, crumbling bridges while the stock market is soaring?
Well, financialization at its core is a pattern. It's a shift where profit starts coming less and less from the physical economy, making things, building factories, shipping goods, and more from financial channels.
So things like debt, speculation, derivatives, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's a systemic move from an industrial economy to a service economy, but with financial services right at the top of that food chain.
So if the old economy was a factory making cars, the new one is like a very sophisticated toll booth that doesn't build the road or the cars, but just gets better and better at collecting fees.
That's a fantastic analogy. And you see that dominance everywhere in the importance of the markets, the motives of the elites, the sheer power of financial institutions. And this wasn't an accident. It didn't just happen overnight.
And there's a pretty clear starting point, right? A kind of structural shock back in the 70s that really kicked this all off. Can you walk us through that? The moment the physical economy just couldn't keep up with the allure of making money from money.
It all started because manufacturing itself was becoming less profitable, and the data here is, it's pretty shocking. Between 1965 and 1973, U.S. manufacturing profitability dropped by 41%.
41%, wow.
A huge drop. So when your return on a new factory or a new piece of equipment falls that fast, what do? Firms did the rational thing from their perspective. They took their capital out of those long-term physical investments and started chasing higher, faster returns in financial assets.
And the big accelerant for that was the Volcker shock in 1979. We should really break down how that single policy decision was almost like a wrecking ball for the industrial base.
It was. Volcker's move was to hike interest rates into the stratosphere to kill inflation. But the side effect, the structural impact on the physical economy was just catastrophic.
How so?
Well, high interest rates make the dollar surge in value. That means American-made goods suddenly become incredibly expensive for anyone overseas to buy.
So it just killed export competitiveness.
Almost overnight. And at home, those sky-high rates punished any industry that needed to borrow money for big investments. Think cars, steel, heavy machinery. They couldn't afford to upgrade their plants or even maintain them.
And I guess that's when the father of that software engineer I met in Sheen, that's when his factory job probably started to look a lot less secure. This wasn't just an abstract financial thing. It hit real people in real towns.
Yeah, absolutely. The shock triggered huge recessions in the early 80s. You saw massive industrial downsizing, plants closing, and a rush to offshore production to cheaper places. And that, in turn, just crushed the labor unions, which were the backbone of the manufacturing sector. So as the physical production base shrank, all that capital had to go somewhere. And it flowed right into the newly deregulated finance sector. That really set the stage for the whole Washington Consensus era.
Which brings us to this idea of the cult of shareholder value. It almost sounds like a religion, but it feels like it was the philosophical justification for dismantling long-term thinking.
That's exactly what it was. The Washington Consensus cemented this one idea. A company's only real job is to maximize returns for its shareholders. Not for its workers, not for the community, just the shareholders.
And that puts all the focus on the next quarter's earnings report, not the next decade's R&D.
Precisely. And this whole culture shift was supercharged by deregulation, especially the repeal of Glass-Steagall in '99. Suddenly you have these enormous financial giants whose entire reason for being is extraction, not creation.
So what did that mean in practice? When a big company made a profit, where did the money go? Was it building the next factory, or was it just feeding this new financial engine?
The data suggests it was actively, disinvesting from the physical world. Why build a factory with a 3% return over a decade when you can get 15% overnight with some clever trading? The money just followed the path of least resistance.
There's one statistic on this that is it's mind-boggling. The analysis of S&P 500 companies from 2003 to 2012 shows that for a whole decade, they basically stopped investing in their own future.
It is staggering. Over that 10-year period, those companies spent 91% of their net earnings on dividends and stock buybacks.
91%.
91%. Let that sink in. If a company made $10 billion, less than $1 billion was left for R&D, for expansion, for maintaining the things they already owned.
When I first read that, I honestly thought it had to be a typo. You're saying that for a decade, the biggest companies decided not to build anything new, just to pump up their stock price.
They chose financial engineering. A stock buyback is a perfect example. You use your profits to buy your own stock, which reduces the number of shares out there, and boom, your earnings per share metric looks better. You look more profitable without investing a single dollar in innovation or people. It's a practice that used to be seen as market manipulation for obvious reasons.
And this leads to something called intellectual decay. That's a powerful phrase. It's the idea that if you stop physically making things, you forget how. The institutional knowledge just evaporates.
Precisely. You lose the whole ecosystem. The German concept is the Zeit that's needed to attract and grow top-tier engineering talent. It's not just that the factory is gone, the entire knowledge base dissolves. Companies become financial holding entities that happen to have some manufacturing on the side, usually overseas.
Like GE?
GE is the classic example, the icon of American engineering. By 2008, almost half its revenue was from GE Capital, its finance arm. Or GM, making a third of its profit from financing car sales, not from making the cars themselves. The focus just shifts entirely to abstraction.
And this creation of abstract wealth is what we mean by phantom wealth, right? Because it doesn't create broad prosperity, just highly concentrated gains.
Exactly right. Take the finance, insurance, and real estate sector, the FIRE sector. It now captures about 40% of all corporate profits in the U.S.
40%.
Yeah.
And what percentage of the workforce does it employ?
That's the kicker, about 5%.
So 40% of the profits, 5% of the jobs. That's a textbook definition of phantom wealth. The capital accumulates without creating jobs or benefits for the wider society.
And that growth, that concentration of profit in one small sector is a huge driver of the income gap we see today.
It has to be. The data must show a direct link.
Oh, it does. Econometric studies show a clear, statistically significant link between the growth of the FIRE sector and rising income inequality, starting right around the early 1980s. The timing is perfect.
So how does it actually work? How does that concentration of profit shift wealth away from, the people who actually make things?
It's about extraction versus circulation. In a healthy industrial economy, revenue has to be constantly reinvested. It flows through the system as wages, R&D, new equipment. It's a wide channel. But in the FIRE sector, profits come from leverage, from fees, from complex trades. They depend on access to capital, not widespread labor. So it empowers what you'd call rentier interests, the asset owners, the institutions.
Instead of going to wages, wealth gets funneled into speculative gains for the people who already own things.
Correct. It becomes an engine for inequality. And the end result is exactly what you described at the beginning. The financial reports look great, but the physical world, the sidewalks, the infrastructure starts to decay because nobody is incentivized to make those long-term investments. That's the fever. And that's the model China's now running away from.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the fever. Let's talk about the cure, or at least the alternative path. Let's pivot to what that engineer called the civilizational ballast. This idea suggests China isn't just looking for growth anymore. It's using its own history, its own identity, to re-engineer its whole approach to statecraft for the very long term.
This is where we get into the concept of China as a civilizational state. It's a term that means it's sui generis, it's one of a kind, it's not just a country, it's this massive modern state that's also the carrier of the world's oldest continuous civilization. And that changes everything. It allows it to operate on a different logic than a typical nation state.
And there's a framework for understanding this, right? The 4 supers in one blend. Let's break that down because it really explains how this long-term stability is even possible.
Okay, so first you have the super large population. That scale gives you an enormous domestic market, a huge talent pool, and, critically, a massive foundation for tech. They produce more engineers every year now than the West combined. That alone changes the game in AI and EVs. Second is the super vast territory. It's basically a continent, and it's now all stitched together by the world's most advanced high-speed rail and digital networks. That scale doesn't just allow for long-term planning, it demands it. Then you have the third and fourth. Super long traditions and super rich cultures. We're talking about a continuous recorded history of governance stretching back thousands of years.
And the one blend is how all of that, the people, the land, the history, gets integrated into a modern context. So the idea is that this deep history gives the state a unique kind of resilience and, I guess, legitimacy.
That's the key, that tradition of unified governance. Since the first unification in 221 BC, the political norm has been unity. Disintegration isn't a political theory. It's seen as the ultimate catastrophe.
Like the warlord era in the early 20th century.
Exactly. The attempt to copy Western models led to chaos and millions of deaths. So that core lesson is burned into the political psyche. Unity and stability are the absolute first priorities. And that gives the state a natural authority. It's seen as the custodian of the civilization itself, which allows it to plan on these incredible time horizons, 5, 10, even 50 years out.
This also shows up in their whole philosophy of governance, this focus on substance over procedure. It's a real challenge to the Western definition of democracy. What does good governance over procedure actually mean on the ground?
It's rooted in the idea of prioritizing the people's livelihood, or minben. The core belief is that the government's job is to deliver tangible benefits, material and non-material, to the people. So the focus is on the Tao, the overall goal, which is good governance and a stable society, more than the shu, which are the specific procedures, like a certain type of election.
So they call it the substance of democracy because the end result, better housing, clean water, a chance for your kids to do better than you, that matters more than the specific process you use to get there.
That's the paradigm they're proposing, that the ultimate test of any system is not whether it checks a procedural box, but whether it delivers good governance judged by its own people. It shifts the debate away from democracy versus autocracy and towards good governance versus bad governance. Legitimacy comes from execution.
And how does this civilizational identity translate into how they act on the world stage? I mean, China became the world's biggest economy by PPP back in 2014. It has immense military power, but it seems to have a very high bar for actually using it.
This is a huge point of difference from past rising powers. Historically, when a nation hits #1 economically, you often see a spike in military adventurism. Look at the US in the 1890s. It surpassed the UK's industrial output and almost immediately went to war with Spain.
Right.
In contrast, China hits that top spot in 2014, and despite having the capacity, it's still focused on negotiated solutions for really complex issues, like in the South China Sea.
So there's a deep-seated prudence there.
Deep-seated is the right word. They cite Sun Tzu. They haven't fired a shot in a conflict in 4 decades, all while experiencing this incredible rise. It's a strategy of patience, based on the belief that their internal development, their ballast, will naturally shift the global balance over time without needing a war.
And that identity, this civilizational ballast, it also acts as a kind of shield, doesn't it? A defense against external pressure to conform to so-called universal values.
It's a massive strategic anchor. As an endogenous civilization, it believes it can generate its own standards and values from its own history. It doesn't need external validation from Western liberalism or the end of history idea. And that gives the state tremendous resilience. It can absorb shocks and maintain a social consensus on its long-term direction, even when it's making a huge pivot away from a model like neoliberalism.
So the civilizational identity is the why and the what, the long-term vision. Now let's get into the how, the firmware upgrade. This is about the shift to a high-efficiency technocratic government, where the old GDP superstars are being replaced by system optimizers who care more about quality and technology than just raw numbers.
Right. This is where the vision hits the pavement. And the best expression of this is what you could call an industrial worship of physical output. The centerpiece of that was the Made in China 2025 plan.
MIC 2025. That was announced in 2015, and it felt like a direct answer to the financial decay we were just talking about.
It was. The goal was profoundly physical, to move from being the world's factory for cheap stuff to being a high-tech powerhouse.
And the key target was self-sufficiency, right?
Self-sufficiency and technological sovereignty. The specific goal was to get the domestic content of core manufacturing materials up to 70% by 2025. This wasn't about market share. It was about controlling the actual means of production.
And despite a lot of external pressure, tariffs, sanctions, all of it, how did they do? Was this massive, decade-long push a success?
The evaluations from late 24 and early 25 say overwhelmingly yes. An internal review found that something like 86% of the 260-plus goals were met. And this isn't just on paper. China is now the world leader in 5 absolutely critical technologies: high-speed rail, graphene, drones, solar panels, and the huge 1EVs and lithium batteries.
Let's just stick with EVs for a second to show the scale. The initial target was to produce 3 million electric vehicles a year.
And they blew past that target way back in 2023. This is what it looks like when a system prioritizes building tangible, high-tech products over flipping real estate. They are literally building the future.
And this technocratic ability isn't just about products. It's about executing these insanely complex regional projects. The prime example has to be the JINJINJI superregion.
The scale of JINJINJI, or JJJ, is just hard for most of us to wrap our heads around. It links Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei province into one cohesive economic unit. We're talking about an area twice the size of South Korea, with a population of over 110 million people.
That's a population bigger than Germany, all inside one integrated, centrally planned region, and the economic output is just as massive.
The region's GDP topped $1.6 trillion in 2024. As a country, JJJ would be in the same league as Spain, but it's the growth that's key. The GDP almost doubled between 2013 and 2023. You can only do that with a government structure that can maintain a strategy for a full decade, something that's almost impossible in a 4-year political cycle.
Is that growth just coming from giant state-owned companies, though? Or has this firmware upgrade created space for the private sector to thrive, too?
That's what shows the system is maturing. In the first quarter of 2025, private enterprise exports from that region surged over 16%. That tells you the state built the infrastructure, the rails, and now, agile, private companies are driving the train, specializing in high-value global supply chains.
And the absolute peak of this long-term technocratic planning has to be the Xi'an New Area. I mean, they literally call it a millennium plan.
That name is a very deliberate signal. It says our planning horizon is 2035, and our strategic vision goes out to 2050. Its main job is to take the pressure off Beijing to move all the non-capital functions out and cure the big city disease of congestion and pollution.
And the planning structure itself is a work of art. It's not just a master plan. It's this incredibly detailed, layered system.
It's an amazing piece of policy architecture. It's hierarchical. One big overarching plan, which then breaks down into 4 major regional plans, and then those break down into 26 highly detailed specialized plans.
26. Covering everything from flood control to the design of a park bench. It sounds like it's designed from the ground up to prevent the kind of bureaucratic infighting that kills big projects in other places.
That's the idea. They had over 1,000 experts and 2,500 engineers working on just the plan itself. The goal is to build the physical infrastructure, the pipes, the transit, the data lines once, and build it right for the next century to avoid the massive costs of decay and retrofitting we talked about earlier.
And this is where it gets really futuristic. Xi'an isn't just a physical city. They're building a digital twin at the same time.
The digital twin city is a complete virtual replica, fed by real-time data from tens of thousands of sensors and cameras. It manages everything: traffic, public safety, environmental conditions. But the real innovation is that every single physical object, from a water pipe to a streetlight, is designed from day one to be part of this digital network. It creates a level of efficiency that legacy cities can only dream of.
But what about the human element? All this efficiency sounds great, but does it create a place people actually want to live?
That's actually baked into the plan. They have mandated 15-minute living zones. The idea is that all essential services, schools, clinics, shops have to be within a short walk or bike ride for every resident. It's designed to reduce car dependency.
And the environmental side is just as strict.
It is. The plan requires over 70% blue and green space by 2035. They've already done massive ecological remediation in the main lake, improving water quality dramatically. They're trying to prove you can have hyper-growth and sustainability if you plan for it from the start.
And this whole approach has a name, doesn't it? Dejiali, the generational relay race. That just perfectly captures this idea that policy isn't just for one administration, it's a cumulative effort.
Exactly. It's a societal project that transcends political terms. There's this great story of an old urban planner, a Mr. Zhao, who spent 30 years drawing these abstract maps for regional integration. They were just theories. But by 2025, his own granddaughter got her first job at the brand new, fully automated logistics hub in Chong'an, built on the exact spot his theoretical maps had predicted decades earlier. What was an abstract idea for him became her physical reality. That's the competitive advantage.
And that shared vision, that high social trust, it translates into real-world speed and efficiency. Like that logistics manager in Xi'an who had to retool a major component design in 72 hours.
In another system, that would be impossible. You'd have months of legal wrangling, contract disputes, risk assessments. But there, the manager and her vendors were able to pivot almost instantly because they were all working toward a shared goal based on trust and a reputation for execution.
So the efficiency isn't just about the tech, it's cultural. It's a system built on collective interest, which is just fundamentally faster than a system built on avoiding lawsuits.
That is the key insight. That's how this technocratic model can execute these massive multi-decade plans with a speed and precision that is the core of the civilizational ballast. It makes the whole system incredibly resilient.
Which brings us right back to where we started, to this massive strategic divergence. On one side, a system that offshored its physical capacity and let finance eat its future, resulting in decay and inequality. And on the other, a system merging its ancient identity with advanced technocracy to build real foundational physical resilience.
And you can see this playing out right now in the global trade numbers. They show this persistent dependency. The consumer-driven, financialized economies are running huge, growing trade deficits, while the integrated industrial regions, especially China and parts of the EU, are running the corresponding surpluses.
The U.S.-China imbalance is still the biggest, right? About $360 billion a year, and it actually got wider in the first part of 2025. That one number shows you, right there, the continuing dependence of the financialized world on the tangible output of the industrial world.
It does, and the really profound implication here is that these rising civilizational states are defining themselves against the Western liberal model, which has arguably disconnected the West from its own physical and cultural roots by chasing financial abstraction. The success of this Eastern model, this focus on stability, physical output, and generational planning, suggests there might be another path for state development, one that moves beyond the limits of short-term financial cycles. The rise of these models means we're in a renewed competition of ideas about how to govern, and hopefully that's a competition where the shared knowledge can enrich us all as we try to tackle these massive global challenges.